the history of the planning profession, the formative victory of the planning profession, was back in the 19th century when planners, who weren't called planners because that profession didn't exist, figured out that if you separate people's houses from the dark satanic mills, that people would live longer. And lifespans increased by decade or more, and the planners were hailed as heroes for moving people away from these belching factories. Unfortunately, it was a good lesson at the time, but as industry became less noxious, the planners never adjusted their technique. So what was essentially separation of different uses from each other became the fundamental act now, well, not so much now, thank goodness, but for the past century or more, of the planning profession, which is planning by zoning, separating things from each other. And if you want to know what planners have done for the last century, it's principally been that. So this is a typical map like you see passed by a city on any given day or a community. And all a map like this tells you essentially is that you're going to not have a mixed-use walkable environment because you have large areas of single use connected by very few streets which become immediately traveled by very many vehicles. But planning by zoning is what planners have been doing for a long time. And this is the Suburban Nation discussion. And it's an oversimplification, but an extremely useful one. That there are really only for as long as we've been building settlements, as long as we've been non-nomadic, since Jericho maybe 8,000 years ago, there are only two ways that humans have chosen to settle. One, for want of a better term, we call the neighborhood, and the other we call sprawl or suburban development or exurban. There's lots of different words for it. I prefer sprawl because people know what that means. This is Newburyport, Massachusetts. It could be anywhere. And what you see here is actually a few different neighborhoods that are located next to each other. Neighborhoods, here's a neighborhood, here's another neighborhood. Neighborhoods are defined in planning terminology by being compact, walkable, diverse, and connected. They're compact in that almost any neighborhood you study historically, and think, for example, about the neighborhoods of Manhattan, the West Village, the East Village, Soho, Chelsea, they're all about a 5-minute walk from edge to center. They're walkable in the sense that there are many small streets, so no street is handling too much traffic. They're diverse in the sense that there are places to work, places to live, places to worship, places to recreate, places to shop, all in the same place. And they're all and they're connected in the sense that when you concentrate people in this sort of mixed-use, walkable way, you create opportunities where transit can work and function well, as opposed to when you disassociate them and then transit stops working. So the neighborhood was not an invention. It's something that evolved naturally in response to human needs. And in that way, it stands in bold contradistinction to sprawl, which was an invention. It was a specific attempt to recreate the city as we know it. And as the opposite of the neighborhood, then, it's characterized as being the opposite four things. It's not compact. It spreads out over, as you know, vast areas of land. It's not diverse. This is all not only housing, but pretty much the same house, right? It's not walkable in the sense that very few streets actually connect anywhere. The rest of these streets don't connect. Therefore, those streets handle an inordinate amount of traffic, and they're not safe to walk on. So you get the phenomenon of the cul-de-sac kid, the kid that's perfectly safe in their little cul-de-sac street, but then you don't let them leave the subdivision because the cars are moving too quickly outside. And they're not connected in the sense that, yes, they're connected by automobiles, but not these densities and this sort of organization, because it doesn't create pedestrians, doesn't support transit. Because all transit riders begin and end their trips as pedestrians. So first you need walkability before transit's going to work. So sprawl is fun, it's easy to categorize, it's easy to understand because the components are all separate and so simple. So you have places to live, where you only live, places where you only work, places where you only shop, the latest big box zoo, the schools that are supersized for the efficiency of the janitorial staff and the pride of the school board, but then because they're so big, they're so far from most of the people they serve, and you can see by the size of the parking lot compared to the building that this is a school to which no student will ever walk. When I was young, the majority of kids walked to school in America. Now it's 17%. It's all a function of this landscape we've created. And then also consolidated recreational facilities. So you can see by the size of this and also by the high-speed road around it, this is why we have soccer moms. Because the kid is not able, as I was as a kid, to get to soccer on his or her own and to get to baseball on their own. And then the final component that no one really counted, when they separated everything from everything else and only gave one way to connect it back together, that's the highway system, and very often the interstate highway system. And this interstate system, which was made for trade and was made for vacation travel, has essentially become in most cities a commuter way, which was never the intention. So I always tell people it's a model that has two parts, and understand that you can have this. This is a choice that's available. Unfortunately, it's the only choice that's available to many Americans. But with this choice, you also get this choice. The two go together. If you separate, you must reconnect with roads. And I love this new ad campaign from Chevron. They've got these in the metro in D.C. and on the sides of buses. And this woman, she's going to do her part for the environment. First of all, this cracks me up because this is like a McDonald's billboard, saying, "I will stop eating hamburgers." I mean, it's like, stop buying what we sell. But the point is, I'm going to leave the car at home. Well, how is she going to leave the car at home? How can she make this choice? This choice is not available to her in that environment. So, and this is just zooming in a little bit, and you see the two models. And what's key in understanding these two models is that it's the same stuff. It's, the offices, it's the shops in red, it's the institutions in blue, it's the parks in green, but they're just supersized, separated, put behind parking lots, and then all the traffic has to go on one road as opposed to this extremely efficient grid where if a car breaks down here and if there's a car fire here, the entire system shuts down, whereas here you can just go around the block. So it's an extremely inefficient way of organizing our communities, and this is what zoning has gotten us. Wonderful cartoons by Leon Krier from Luxembourg, who was the genius behind the first generation of new urbanists, about separating things unnecessarily. What if we did that to the human body? How would we function? And then what if we did it to our diet? Monday, 32 pints of liquids. Tuesday, 3 kilograms of meat. And then you notice the next week it says at the bottom, note, individual deceased, experiment discontinued. So with zoning, which determined where things went, what was lost, planning became, rather than something that happened over time by people who were actually designing places and buildings, it became a more technocratic profession done by people who paid attention to statistics and legalese. And the others, because we lost the design component of planning, it was replaced by codes. So the other half of the current system is planning by coding. We all know how big and fat these codes are that we have to deal with every day. I just built my house in Washington, D.C., and I was dealing with this code, the Washington, D.C. code, and you better believe I needed I won't exaggerate. I needed 4 separate variances to build this house in Washington because the code did not take into account, for example, that I lived on a corner lot, right? So that's what we're dealing with in our codes. They really don't deal with the form of the building. They deal with statistics like FAR, floor area ratio, the ratio of the interior to the size of your lot. And this is why we're creating so many places that we don't want to walk around. This is an FAR of 2.0, what's called a dingbat, the apartment house floating above the parking lot, probably the least walkable environment you can imagine. This is also an FAR of 2.0. I saw a wonderful apartment building just like this in your Woodruff neighborhood. But a beautiful apartment building, FAR 2.0. This is an FAR of 1.0. You flee this environment the minute you turn off your car engine. This is an FAR of 1.0. FAR of 0.8 outside of Toronto. FAR of 0.8 outside of Toronto. The last good projects, the good ones were the ones that I helped build. So